So in terms of the series that Max and I are running here, we're looking at sections 33, 34 and 35. And you'll notice that 34 is crossed out because I'm incorporating that into in both these other sections there. So we're going to look at the first part of Revelation chapter 13 initially. And hopefully you did your homework and read chapter 13, but we're going to go through some bits and pieces. So as you know, the book of Revelation is based on the book of Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 7, there were 4 beasts. You know, the first was like a lion, the second like a bear, the third like a leopard, and the fourth was just unnameable. It was so different from the others that Daniel could not give it a name other than describe it as dreadful and terrible. So when we come to the book of Revelation, which beast do you think we're going to be focusing on? Does anyone have an answer there?
Roman fourth beast.
Yeah, thanks, Samaral. So it's the fourth beast. It's this dreadful beast here. And so the fourth beast represents the Roman Empire. And you think, why does the Bible is going to spend so much emphasis on this Roman Empire? Well, that's because that's where our brothers and sisters lived after, many of them lived all lived in the Roman Empire when Christianity sort of took place. But the Roman Empire was going to become the center of false religion. And it would be where the counterfeit Christ would be. It would be where the counterfeit kingdom of God. So how then can we prove that the fourth beast or the Roman Empire is the focus of the book of Revelation? Well, the answer is in Daniel. And I just ask if you can just turn with me to Daniel chapter 7 for a moment. We're only going to briefly spend some time here, but just to re-establish the fact that Revelation, or the beast in Revelation, is based on the book of Daniel. And so I'm going to ask that we read, and we read verse 9. Actually, I'm going to read this one because I'm just going to glance through this. So Daniel chapter 7 describes the 4 beasts, and then in verse 7 he describes the 4th beast. In verse 8 he then describes the horns, and then this little horn that comes out. And then in verse 9 it says this. It says, I watched till thrones were put in place. And when you read that, and it says, talks about the Ancient of Days coming, and so forth. And he's watching this 4th beast until thrones were put in place. Now, if you have the King James Version, it says something like it says, and then thrones were cast down. Now, I'd like you to scrub that out because it gives you the impression that it's the thrones of the kingdoms of men being cast down. It's not. We're watching till thrones were set up or put in place. That's the judgment thrones of the saints, which really fits the context of this, and it fits the context of a passage like Revelation 20, verse 4. If you want to put a little cross-reference there, Revelation 20, verse 4. And then verse 11 says, verse 11 says, I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. So Daniel speaks about this 4th beast and its little horn lasting until the coming of Christ. So, and just to confirm that in verses, we're just going to read verse 26 to 27. John, are you happy to read that for us? Can you read verse 26 to 27? And while you do that, I'm just going to get my watch. Otherwise, you guys are going to be in trouble.
Daniel 7, 26, 27. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms of the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him.
Okay, I'm going to ask you guys a question here. In verse 26, it says, and they, it uses a few pronouns out. They shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it. My question to you, who are the they and who is the it there in verse 26?
Is they the saints and then it is the fourth beast?
That is correct, Katie. Thank you very much. So the they is the saints. That is correct. And to consume and destroy it, well, it, if you have a look there, as Katie said, is the fourth beast. But it also is speaking about, particularly about the little horn that's on that fourth beast, because in verse, if you look, in verse 24, it says, the 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. The saints will be given into his hand. And then it says, but the king, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it. So you're right. They is the saints who are going to destroy the fourth beast and the little horn. And so what we have then is what you read in the book of Revelation. Even though it might appear to be different beasts, it is the same fourth beast. It's just that you're going to see it in all these different forms. Now, this is really, really important. And this is why I'm stressing this point. All right, because there are so many different other interpretations which are incorrect, that are given out there in Christianity and even in Christadelphian, to say that, you know, these beasts are not the Roman Empire. This is the Roman Empire in its different forms. So the different beasts in Revelation is the Roman Empire in its different forms or in different phase. It's like the beast that keeps morphing. It changes, and that's why Daniel can't describe it, because it just looks so different to the other beasts. And so in here we have I guess what would appear to be the different forms of the fourth beast in the book of Revelation. So in Revelation 12 we have the great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. Revelation 13 verse 1, you read a beast that comes out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns. In chapter 13 verse 11, a beast that comes out of the earth with 2 horns. And then finally in Revelation 17 you have the scarlet colored beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And they are all the same fourth beast that Daniel saw in different forms. Now let me give you an analogy which hopefully you'll remember. You'll remember this next slide. So here's a picture of someone that you may or may not recognize. When this particular boy was young, he was rather cute and innocent. He was born with sort of very light colored hair, and in this picture you can see he's got brown hair, which is pretty straight. When this boy grew up at the age of 21, his appearance changed rather considerably. He had quite an arrangement or a mop, I could say, of black curly hair, and looked very different to the little boy on the left. And at the age now of almost 53, almost there, the appearance of this person has morphed into an old, grumpy man, just ugly as anything. Yet it is the same person, right? You know, imagine John seeing a vision of this. You know, how scary would that be for him? You know, he would describe these 3 as 3 separate beasts. But whilst each one looked differently, it is the same beast. it's the same beast there. So hopefully you'll remember that, a little bit of an analogy, and we'll move on. So let's come to Revelation chapter 13 now and look at verse 1.
Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name.
Right, thanks, John. So in the chapter before this, in Revelation 12, there's a beast called the dragon. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. And here in chapter 13, we see this beast which is coming out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And this symbology has very strong links back to the beast in Daniel chapter 7. So this is a slide we put up at the seminars, and we compare the 4th beast in Daniel 7 with the beast of the sea in Revelation 13. So we can see that in both chapters, in Daniel and Revelation, both of them rose up from the sea. And that's the Great Sea, that's the Mediterranean Sea. They both had 10 horns. In Daniel 7, the beast incorporated the dominions of the lion, the bear, and the leopard. And in Revelation 13, verse 2, if you glance there, you'll see that the beast had characteristics of a leopard, a bear, and a lion. And in particular, it had the lion's mouth. Now, I want you to remember that. The beast in Daniel 7 said it had a mouth speaking great words against God. And in Revelation 13, this beast had a mouth speaking blasphemy. In Daniel 7, the beast made war with the saints. And in Revelation 13, this beast also made war with the saints. In Daniel 7, the beast torments for 1260 days. And in Revelation 13, it continues and it torments. It makes war with the saints for 42 months. Do you think God is trying to tell us something here? Do you think he's trying to tell his little children that the beast in Revelation 13 has got all to do with the 4th beast? Well, I think so anyway. Hopefully you've been convinced by this slide. And so if you compare the beast, if you've got your Bible open, just have a glance at Revelation 12, verse 3. And do you notice there it talks about the dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns? Can you all see that? Yeah. If you come over to Revelation 13 and verse 1, you also see a beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns. But what I'd like you to do as good Bible students, I'm going to ask you a question here. What is the difference between the 7 heads and 10 horns of the dragon in Revelation 12, verse 3, and this beast of the sea in Revelation 13, verse 1? Can you see a significant difference?
The one in chapter 12 has 7 crowns, whereas this one has 10 in chapter 13.
That's interesting. Okay, that's very good. Actually, that's a really good observation, and and the answer is to do with what you just said. Where are the crowns in the beast of Revelation 12? Where are the crowns?
Head and
good. Yes, good. Thanks, Kay. Yeah. So the crowns are on the heads of the beast in Revelation 12. Can you see that? All right, important point. This is really important. The crowns are on the heads. When you come over to Revelation 13, verse 1, where are the crowns?
On the horns.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. They're on the horns. Now, this is a really important difference because this is going to time the prophecy of Revelation 13. See, Revelation 12, if you remember Max's class, is talking about the rise of Constantine and when the power was on the Roman emperors or the heads of the Roman Empire, was on the forms of government there. Whereas here, the power has transferred from the heads, or the authority is transferred from the heads to the horns. So this is now going to time the prophecy to the time when the 10 horns are now ruling the kingdom. Does that make sense? So the timing of the prophecy, therefore, is after the year 476 AD, because in 476 AD, that's when the Roman Empire collapsed and when the 10 horns have come to power. So like the barbarian nations, like the Visigoths, and you know, the Ostrogoths and so forth, have set themselves up as independent sovereignties in the territory of the Western Roman Empire. Right? So this prophecy now is going to occur after 476 AD. Remember, that's an important date to remember. 476 AD is when the Western Roman Empire collapsed. And so you'll also notice in verse 2, the end of verse 2, do you notice it says there, and the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. So the dragon, which is the military power, right, the military power of the Roman Empire, which is now in the east in Constantinople. Do you remember Constantine? He moved his military headquarters, or his own, the seat of the empire, he moved it to Constantinople, which is the city of Istanbul in Turkey today, right? So if you can picture that, Constantinople in the east. And so that is the dragon. And so the sea beast with 10 crowned horns represents the Roman Empire at a time when there was a combination of what we call imperial power, and there was also in the west the Bishop of Rome. And what we're going to have a quick look at is how that all developed. But let's just establish another fact here, another important point. It says there, it said in verse 1, the end of verse 1, it says that on his heads he had a blasphemous name. All right. And when you read on in Revelation 13, you notice there, verse 5, it says, in verse 5, it says it had a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. In verse, and you notice there in Revelation 13, verse 1, this beast, it talks about it's got a mouth, but it says that in verse 1 it had, in verse 2 rather, it had the mouth of a lion. Now in Daniel, which kingdom was represented by a lion? Does anyone remember which was the first beast, the lion?
Babylonians.
Yeah, it was the Babylonians, Babylon. So this fourth beast here, it's got this mouth, but it's the mouth of Babylon, which and Babylon represents false religion. And even you might remember in Revelation 13, that woman that rides the beast, she's called Mystery Babylon because she speaks the blasphemies of a false religion, or just like Babylon did. In verse 6, it says he opened his mouth, that's the Babylonian mouth, in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. Verse 7 says it made war with the saints. And verse 8 says all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So you can see here that this whatever this power is, there's certainly a religious influence here. This is a religious power. You know, and there's several places in the Old Testament, particularly, that demonstrate what blasphemy is. Now, we're not going to go through those, but I've got them summarized here on the slide here. So blasphemy would be when people who profess to be Christians when they are not. Blasphemous people are persecutors of true believers. False religion or blasphemy invents its own way of worshipping God. And blasphemy is when you speak lies in the name of the Lord. And so there we have a blasphemous name. And just to sort of demonstrate a few things here, Like you just look at the name, it says the names, it has the names of blasphemy or the titles of blasphemy. And we know that the religion that is at the head of this, the Roman Catholic Church, the priests have the title of Father. And you remember the words where Jesus says, don't call anyone your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. And to make things worse, the Pope here is addressed as the Holy Father. Even the word Pope means papa. It comes from the Latin word papa, which means father. And it's perhaps the worst one here. The Pope has the title of the Vicar of Christ. He is in place of Christ on the earth. All right? And so, and just looking at a couple of other slides here, we have, even in modern times, you call 1922 modern times. Des probably might remember this when Pope Pius the 11th said, he said, you know that I am the Holy Father, the representative of the God on the earth, the Vicar of Christ, which means I am God on the earth. Now that is when we talk about pompous words or speaking blasphemy, here it is. Moving on a bit closer, this was an article in the news about Pope Benedict when he came to Australia. And here is the Dr. Pell, who was the Archbishop of Sydney at the time. He said, we all prayed at Mass, and the Holy Father spoke individually with the victims. And, addressing the Pope as the Holy Father. And here we have some words here. These are just cited from different other writings here. It says Pope Pius V, he said, the Pope and God are the same. So he has all power in heaven and earth, talking about the Pope. The Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were, God and the Vicar of God. And the last one here, all names which in the scriptures that are applied to Christ, well, they should be applied to the Pope as well. And so, these are real words of blasphemy, just outright blasphemy. And whilst we talk about it said it had a blasphemous name on its heads, that's where Revelation 13 verse 1 says it. The heads of the beast are symbolic, but there's a literal sense in which the blasphemous name was on the head here. The Pope wore what is called a tiara. And when you look at, the Catholic Encyclopedia and all this sort of, all the Catholic documentation, then you realize that, it tries to explain what the tiara represents, and there are several different interpretations of it. But here is one from the Catholic website. It says, this is what it says here. It says that the Pope is the Vicar of Christ who shares in his threefold office. That's why it's a three-tiered crown, the tiara. The threefold office of priest, prophet, and king, and consequently shares in his work to sanctify, teach, and lead others in the faith. I just noticed here, this is scary. See this guy here? Man, that looks like me or Simon. What do you reckon? Yeah, I'm a bit worried. What you might have been there, Simon. But anyway, we'll move on.
I thought you photoshopped that in there, David.
No, I didn't. I just noticed it then. So anyway, we moved on. So yeah, Simon,
I was trying to assassinate him at the time.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough. All right. So and this one here, this is from the Vatican News website. It says the papal tiara formed by three crowns symbolizes the triple power of the Pope. Look what it says. He's as the Father of Kings, the Governor of the world, and the Vicar of Christ. Now, from what I read of the Bible, those titles there come from the Bible, but don't refer to the Pope. They refer to Christ as the future King of the world. But the Pope is attributing those titles to himself. How blasphemous is that? Now, we come to a pretty interesting part of the prophecy. And what we're going to see, something remarkable happens to this beast. Let's read Revelation 13, verse 3. And I might go to Michael Kleinker this time. Michael, if you can unmute, please, and read Revelation 13, verse 3.
And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast.
Right, thanks, Michael. So here we read about this beast has one of his heads. I need you to stay with me for this, all right? Because this takes a little bit of concentrating, okay? One of his heads receives a deadly wound. Now, as far as I understand, when you receive a deadly wound, you're dead, okay? That means you die after it. But remarkably, the wound is healed. So what does that mean? That means that the head is resurrected, right? It's life from the dead, it's resurrected. So this leads to some questions. Which head of the beast was wounded? And when was it healed? And what is this referring to, this deadly wound that is healed? Now, to answer that, we've got to go over to Revelation chapter 17. So just turn with me a few pages over to Revelation 17 and verse 9. And this is the bit you really, really need to concentrate on, okay? So, Michael, I'm going to get you to read verses 9 to 17, and just wherever there's a comma, I want you to just pause like you would if you're a good school student and just read it slowly. So Revelation 17, verses 9 to 11.
Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition.
All right, thanks, Michael.
Yep.
Okay, so the answer to our question there about which head was wounded and when is it healed, this is going to answer that question here. So you may want to cross-reference this in your Bible here, because firstly, Revelation 17 verse 9 gives us a geographical identity of the beast, the 7 mountains or the 7 hills of Rome. But more importantly, what we want to talk about here is that Rome had 7 kings. 5 were fallen, 1 is, and the other had not yet come. And then it says there would be an 8th king who would not be a new king, but he would be one of the 7 who was resurrected. Now, let's establish something here, but let's be clear that this cannot be talking about individual men or individual kings, because Rome in its history had far more than 7 kings. Rather, it is speaking about 7 forms of rulership that Rome had. And so here on the next slide, we have a bit of a list of 7 forms of rulership that Rome had. And these were, I'll just sort of read them out. We had a regal form of government. That means, and that's because ancient Rome was initially ruled by kings. It was a monarchy. And that lasted to about 500 BC, when Rome became a republic. And then when Rome became a republic, there was a democratically elected Senate, and presiding over that Senate were 2 men, 2 individual heads of state rather than just having 1. And these 2 men were known as consuls, and hence you have a consular form of government. And then there's this funny word called the decemviral form of government, because in the Roman Republic, there were two classes of people. You may have heard of this. You had the patricians. My mouth's not working too well today. You had the patricians, which were the upper class, and you had the plebeians, which were the lower class, or the common people. You know, we call them plebs today. And these two classes of people, the patricians and the plebs, were often at odds with each other and caused a lot of division in the empire, in the Republic of Rome. And so to settle these disputes, there was an envoy of Romans who went all the way over to Greece, to Athens, to study their laws and their ways. And they brought back these laws back to Rome, and they commissioned 10 men to govern Rome via these rules. And hence the term we have, the decemviri, or the 10 men that ruled Rome, the decemviral form of government. And then we had the tribunes' reign. So there was a period when military tribunes, these were the very high-ranking officers in the Roman army, who were appointed to the rulership of Rome instead of the consuls. There was a period when this happened as well. And then we had, and very early on in the Roman Republic, there were periods when during a crisis, one of those two consuls was given supreme power to rule over Rome for a short period of time. They were called dictators. But particularly later on in the Roman Republic, and I'm talking, say, 80 BC to about 40 BC, there were rulers that took over the rulership and became dictators. The last of these dictators was, you may have heard this guy, Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar, in 44 BC, he was assassinated on the Ides of March, or the 74th day of the Roman calendar. Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times by a group of senators. And his nephew, whose name was Octavian, what happened was he gained, after the death of Julius Caesar, Octavian gained the control of the whole empire, and he virtually abolished the power of the Senate. And he then became the first Roman emperor. He was then named Augustus Caesar. You know, this whole thing, I don't know if any of you have watched the Star Wars or anything, but in that original series of Star Wars, this is just like, you can see Star Wars is modeled on the Roman Empire and how it formed. It's just a direct parallel. But this Augustus Caesar, he changed Rome from being a republic to an empire. And in fact, Octavian, or Augustus Caesar, he was the emperor of Rome when Jesus was born. And his stepson, Tiberius, who became the second Roman emperor, well, his name is actually mentioned in Luke chapter 3. So that's just giving you a little bit of a Bible connection there. And so now what we have is imperial Rome. Imperial Rome, where you had a Roman emperor ruling over this universal empire. You know, it's not just the Republic of Rome anymore. Rome has taken over the then known world, if you like. And so it becomes an empire. And imperial Rome lasted a very long time. It lasted from 27 BC through to 476 AD. And think about this, right? At the time when John received his vision in the book of Revelation, well, which form of government was governing Rome? Well, it was the imperial head, right? And so when John is given this vision in Revelation 17, it says, remember it says in verse 10, it said, five have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come. So the imperial head is the one that is, or was in the time of John. Does that make sense? That is the imperial head of the Roman Empire. Now, the Western Roman Empire ended in 476 AD when the last emperor, Romulus, was dethroned. And Rome was ruled for a period of 60 years by the Goths, or the Gothic kings. And that's described here as the other head that had not yet come in the time of John when he received that vision. Okay? And he says that, and John's told that that Gothic head, or that seventh head, would only last a short time. And so, you know, and you think to yourself, well, you know, Dave, you know, how can you prove all this is true? You know, and I've got to say that in the preparation for these classes, you can ask the lead, I spent hours and hours and days preparing this. Not so much for preparing the slides and so forth, that's not too hard. But what took a long time was I wanted to find independent proof for all these things from outside our Christadelphian literature. And I struggled to find something about the 7 forms of government in Rome. You know, where does it say that? Where does it say that? Because none of the Christadelphian exposit, or the ones that I read anyway, showed where they got this information from. But I finally found this. You may have heard of this guy whose name was Tacitus. Tacitus, if that's how I pronounce it, he was a person who lived in AD 14. Okay, and this is, he wrote a history book at the time when Jesus himself would have been a teenager. And in the very first paragraph of his writings about the history of Rome, he writes this. He writes that there were 6 forms of government in Rome before. And so he says it first was ruled by kings, and then there was a consulship, and then when there were the decemvirs, and there were the tribunes, and then the despotism, well, that's the dictators, came, and then it became an empire, which is the imperial head. When I like, it was like finding gold, seeing this, and there it was. Now he mentions 6 forms of government. Revelation described 7, didn't it? But that's because at the time of John, remember, John said, at the time you are getting this vision, you are in the 6th form. So the Tacitus could only write of 6 forms of government because the 7th had not yet come, because that happened by the Goths about 400, 500 years later. And so here we have the proof that there was 6 forms of government up to the time when John wrote the book of Revelation. And what we're going to focus on the rest of this class is this 6th head, the empire, the imperial head. And so remember Revelation 17, it said that the 6th head would be gone, replaced by the 7th. And what we're seeing, do you remember in Revelation 13, it said that one of its heads received a deadly wound? That is the 6th imperial head. It received a wound when the Goths took over the kingdom. But then it said the deadly wound would be healed, and we would have now an 8th head, which John is told is one of the 7. Okay, you got it? So what we're seeing is the imperial head, or the imperial form of the Roman Empire, would be revived. And this is what we're seeing in Revelation 13. So come back to Revelation 13, and I do have to move on here, right? Revelation 13 and verse 4. Verse 4. It says, so they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. What does this actually mean? So it's saying that the beast and the dragon are living at the same time. The beast being the Western Roman Empire, the dragon being the military power in the East. And it says there, and so where does the beast get its power from? It says it got it from the dragon. Okay, the dragon was the city of Constantinople, which was the seat of military power of the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople. And so remember that the Western Empire, look at the year, 476, the Western Empire had collapsed and was being ruled by the 10 horns, which now have the crowns on the heads. The Goths ruled over this Italian peninsula. The city of Rome itself had actually become a nothing city, because the seat of power was actually the city of Ravenna. I don't know how you pronounce Ravenna, if that's how you pronounce it. It wasn't Rome. In fact, Rome's population had shrunk from about 1.5 million people in the days of Constantine to just about 100,000 people by the year AD 500. Rome had become a nothing city. However, there was still one person lurking about in the city of Rome. There was one person that was slowly going to, but surely going to grow to extreme power. That Revelation describes it's such great power that all people on the earth, or the Roman earth, would worship this power. This man in Rome was the Bishop of Rome. And because Rome had lost the presence of an emperor, right? There's no emperor in Rome anymore. This left the Bishop of Rome gaining more and more influence over the city. Even though it was insignificant, it still had influence over the city and its surrounding area. And because Rome had no power of itself, it needed help, right? Because it was like a little religious power here. It had no military. So he needed help. And the help he got was from the military power from Constantinople. And this is the beast of the sea. Okay, the beast of the sea. And we come over to that. And what happened now, what happens is this man named Justinian becomes the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. You may have heard of this guy before. And this guy in Constantinople, he had the ambition of reviving the imperial rule over the West. And so what he did, he and his general Belisarius, they swiftly conquered the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. He conquered the Ostrogoths, and he reclaimed for the empire the Italian peninsula. And so Justinian, actually, if you look at this quote here this is from Wikipedia, it's describing Justinian's reign is marked by the ambitious but only partly realized renovatio imperii, or the restoration of the empire. The empire strikes back, if you like. And so, and Justinian, he was very influential in religious affairs. He saw church and state as one. He wanted a single empire with a single religion. He built many churches, including the famous Hagia Sophia, which is still in Istanbul today. And so many of Justinian's laws that he had introduced into the empire centered on religion. He made several laws against heretics and pagans, and he tried to solve all the religious disputes himself. He even personally elected the popes that were in Rome. And here's a little snippet out of a history book, a well-respected history book in 1928 on the Eastern Roman Empire. And this is what he said. He said, during Justinian's reign, the See of Rome, that's the Bishop of Rome, enjoyed supreme church authority. And he said in one letter, the emperor addressed the Pope as the head of all the holy churches. And they said there was always this battle between the Bishop of Rome and the Bishop of Constantinople, you know, who was supreme. And Justinian, in one of his letters, addresses the Pope in Rome to be the head honcho. And in the next century, in 602 AD, there was this man by the name of Phocas. Who's this guy here on the left? He actually usurped the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, this guy, describing his personality, he was a villain, a tyrant, and a murderer. Phocas, he was an absolute brutal man. Yet the Pope in Rome, being the ambitious guy and the cunning guy that he was, Gregory I, he saw in this new emperor some opportunity. And the Pope referred to Phocas as a pious and a clement lord, just to suck up to him, if you like. And meanwhile, in Constantinople, there was this Catholic deacon. He's pictured on the right here. He became a diplomat. Now, this is really ringing alarm bells here. He became a diplomat for the Eastern Roman Emperor Phocas. You know, because we're not supposed to get involved with politics here, but he becomes his diplomat. And then Phocas later on, he nominates this guy as the next pope in 607 AD. This guy's name is Pope Boniface II. And sometime later, the Emperor Phocas writes this decree about Boniface. Actually, he says, I think it's Boniface III, sorry. He says, Emperor Phocas appointed Boniface III as the new Bishop of Rome. Then Phocas writes through imperial, look at the term, imperial decree of the Roman government proclaims Boniface III as the head of all the churches. The little horn of the beast, which came up after the 10 horns, was now growing in power. And in a commentary, again from Wikipedia, he talks about this period as the Byzantine papacy. It says the Byzantine papacy was a period of return to imperial domination of the papacy from 537 to 752. And then he says Justinian I restored the Roman imperial rule in the Italian peninsula after the Gothic War. Look at that. I just find that incredible. All these from secular sources outside of Christadelphian writings. Now, it says there that this power had authority to continue for 42 months. Or, as we would know, if you did the maths there, that would equate to 1,260 days. And 1,260 days, following the day for a year principle, is 1,260 years. And we can apply that to these different time periods. There's several different applications. So in 529 to 533, Justinian resurrects the imperial head with his code and decree. So you can see there, that's a time when the little horn is growing in power. The papal horn is growing. But in 1789 to 1793, during the French Revolution, the papacy was delivered a huge blow. And that was delivered not only to the papacy, but to the state as well, because that's to the monarchy. Oh, so not to the monarchy, rather to the head of state. In 608 to 610, Phocas declared the Pope as the head of all the churches. And in 1868, 1870, the Pope loses temporal power. These are 1,260-year periods, which the power was to continue for 42 months. And now we've got less than 10 minutes to talk about the beasts of the earth. I'm gonna fly through this bit here for the sake of time. But what happened was, do you remember it said that the Eastern Roman emperor was the one that helped Rome? It was the dragon sort of supplied its power, its authority, its throne. Well, the Eastern Roman emperor had another problem that developed. It was actually quite a huge problem. There was a power that was growing in the east of the Eastern Roman Empire that it had to confront, and that was the rise of Islam. And Islam became a conquering force, and it became a thorn in the side of the Eastern Roman Empire. So instead of helping the Pope in the West, the emperor in Constantinople had to divert his forces down to the area of the Middle East to conquer the Islamists. And as a result, the papacy was losing its military support. And on top of that, there was this Germanic tribe called the Lombards who had conquered much of the Italian peninsula. You can see there, all the stuff in green here was conquered by the Lombards. And so the Pope was under threat. So instead of supporting, because he had crawled, remember, he was crawling to the Eastern Roman Emperor before, even though he was a brutal man, even instead of sort of now supporting the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople, the Pope is now going to rebel against him. And the papacy was giving up on Constantinople for help. And he began to seek help from another power that was much more powerful in the West. And this was the power of the Franks, right? Or the power in France. And in 754 AD, you can see there on the right here, this Pope Stephen II, he went to France and appealed to the king of the Franks, whose name was Pepin. And a deal was struck between Pepin and Pope Stephen, and the Franks turned against what were their allies in the Lombards and defeated them in two major battles in 754 and 756 AD. And you see this little thing here, you may have heard of this before, the Exarchate of Ravenna. The Exarchate of Ravenna, the Exarch of Ravenna, the city here, this was ruled by Constantinople, this area here in yellow. And the Exarch was a governor from Constantinople. Well, what happened was the Franks came down, Pepin came down, defeated the Lombards, kicked out the Exarch of Ravenna, and he gave this part of Italy to the Pope. And it's called the donation of Pepin. And he donated it to the Pope so that he now, instead of the governor from Constantinople ruling this power, he gave it to the Pope to rule. And this became the basis of what we call the Papal States. And the Papal States were there all this time from 756 AD and even grew to this extent here to 1700 AD. The Pope had temporal power. He had he had complete rule or civil and religious authority over these large areas of Italy, right? And this was now the Pope had become, or the little horn had become, this great power in the Roman Empire. And here's a little comment here from this British historian named Charles Oman. He comments on this period, he said, thus the Pope became an important secular prince by taking over the old Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire dominion in central Italy. The little horn was growing. And now we have the beast of the earth. And look, let's read this. Michael, do you mind reading this section? If you don't mind, let's finish this off. Bear with me for another 10 minutes and we'll finish this off. Revelation 13, verses 11 and 12.
Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed.
All right, so thanks, Michael. So John sees the emergence of a beast that comes from the earth. Now, this is the Roman earth. Remember when we talk about earth, it's the Roman earth. This is the Holy Roman Empire. Yet this new empire, which was not really a new empire, was actually, what we're seeing here is the revived sixth head, which is now the eighth head of the original beast. The eighth head has now grown to become an empire and it's the little horn now which has grown greater in power than its fellow horns. And on Christmas Day, 800 AD, a very unexpected event occurred. During Christmas Mass, Pepin's son, whose name's Charlemagne, was crowned as emperor of this new Roman Empire. And it's even said that Charlemagne had no idea that this was coming. The Pope had schemed this coronation to establish the Franks as the power who would be the protectorate of the Western Roman Empire. Constantinople now was out of the picture. So now we have two separate legs of the Roman Empire, the Western and the Eastern legs are now firmly established. And we have here the Holy Roman Empire that lasted for 1,000 years, which was eventually overthrown by Napoleon in 1806. We would call this, as Bible students, the false millennium, or the counterfeit kingdom of God. It was an empire in Western Europe that was ruled by the papacy and by Germanic kings. And here's a slide that describes it here. It was holy because it had two horns that was like a lamb. It looked holy. It was Roman. It spoke like a dragon. And it was an empire because it exercised all the power of the first beast. And it says it had two horns like a lamb. And the two horns represent the two powers that ruled over it. And here's a picture here showing the Pope. This is Pope Pius II and the Emperor Frederick III meeting together in the year 1450. A classic representation of this earth beast that had two horns. And the empire, the Holy Roman Empire, just grew and grew and became, and after initially being the empire of the Franks, the empire developed into the Germanic Federation of Nations. And for centuries, the military power was provided by the Germans, while the Pope represented ecclesiastical or church authority. And later on, the title of the empire was the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. And then, in verses 14 and 15, it talks about this image of the beast. And this image, because what this was an image of the original empire. The Holy Roman Empire was an image of the original beast, the beast that was wounded and now revived. This is the little horn of Daniel 7 becoming greater than his fellows. This guy named Thomas Hobbes, he was a secular British philosopher. And in the year 1651, he wrote this book called Leviathan. And he comments in this book about how the church and state had its influence over society. And this guy, he said in the second paragraph here on the screen, he said, if a man consider the original of this great ecclesiastical dominion, he will easily perceive that the papacy is no other than the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire, the ghost, or, if you like, the image of the beast. And even the church structure, the structure of the Catholic Church is based on the structure of the Roman government here. You can see that on the screen here. So I'll just flick past that as we're running out of time. And sorry, what I was going to say there is that the Catholic system of things is truly a Latin system. Throughout its history, Latin has been the language and the structure of the church. It is the Latin kingdom. It is led by the Latin man, or as it's called in Greek, Latinos. And so you remember in Revelation 13, it says, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. And look, you add up the number of that man, the vicar of Christ, the chief priest, or the dux cleri, or Latinos, which is the Latin man. Even the Roman numerals, if you add up each of the digits, you get 666. You know, it's Latin. It's Latin to a key, you know, to a T. I'm going to end the class on this. This is just a little story, and this really, really highlights. This highlights how much power the Pope had in the empire. See, whilst the Roman Empire was ruled by kings and popes, they did not always agree. You know, there were disputes about the degree of power that the Pope actually had. You know, and there was one leader particularly who disputed the power of the Pope, and this guy was a king in Germany whose name was Henry IV. Okay. And King Henry, he didn't like the idea of the Pope having so much power. And this is the story we've called here the road to Canossa. And what's this all about? Well, this King Henry IV, he gained the support of his people and actually had the upper hand against the Pope. He said the Pope should not have the power that he has. And the Pope's power was really was under serious threat. However, the then Pope, who's Gregory VII, he had the ace up his sleeve. He had the wild card. When all seemed lost for Pope Gregory VII, what he did was he said, I'm going to excommunicate this king of Germany. I'm going to excommunicate him from the empire. And that he did. And you think, well, what's that mean? Oh, that's, you know, that means nothing. What can the Pope do to me? But his word got out, and what happened was things went quickly pear-shaped for this king of Germany, King Henry, and the other, because the other rulers are wanting to take opportunity to seize the throne, crawl to the Pope, and take the throne. And so to keep the throne, Henry, he was just left with one choice, was to go and repent to Pope Gregory. And so Henry had arranged a meeting with Pope Gregory, and the Pope made him travel all the way from this place called Spire, all the way down through Europe to the castle of Canossa. Hence we've called this the road to Canossa. And of all times of the year, he picked the absolute worst time of the year to travel. It was in January. Now in January, in that part of the world, January is the middle of winter. And so in January, in the middle of winter, King Henry begins this long, long journey. It's about 1,000 kilometers to the castle of Canossa. It was, like I said, almost 1,000 kilometers one way. And then he got to this thing here called the Alps. You can see this fuzzy bit on the map called the Alps. Well, the Alps is go back a slide. The Alps is this very, very high, steep, rugged mountain range. And there were some passes through the Alps. But what happened was the nobles who controlled these passes, perhaps in fear of this excommunication from the Pope, or fear of the Pope, blocked the passes for this guy, Henry, to travel on. They blocked him. He said, you can't travel on the paths. So what he had to do is he had to divert around here, and he came along this way. And if you look here, this is the rugged terrain of the Alps. And so what happened was he had to cross, he had to travel through this part here, through this valley, and then he had to cross this mountain range of Mount Cenis. And Henry and his wife Bertha and his young son Conrad and their entourage, of course, had to divert their route, and they risked their lives by crossing the mountain pass. And this is what it looks like. This is what Mount Cenis looks like. They had to cross over this particular mountain. It looks beautiful here. It looks like a fantastic ski resort. I'd just love to go there. He had to cross that with his family. how they did that was incredible. Anyway, they made it. After a long journey, they reached Pope Gregory's accommodation there in the castle of Canossa on the 25th of January, 1077 AD. Only problem was when the Pope reached the castle, the Pope refused to let him in. And waiting at the gates, Henry is desperate, and he puts on this clothing of repentance. He walked around barefoot and he fasted in a blizzard for 3 full days. And many of his entourage, including his wife and his son, they removed their shoes, walked around barefoot in the snow as saying, please, please let us in. Please, we repent, we repent. But the Pope made them wait in the freezing cold. And after 3 days, they opened the gate to the frozen king, who went on his knees and he bowed before the Pope and he begged for forgiveness. And Pope Gregory absolved Henry and invited him back into the church, and he was no longer excommunicated. And then King Henry then returned to Germany. That story demonstrates the supreme power that the papacy had over Europe. There is a lot more to say about the beast and its image, especially on how it persecuted our brothers and sisters, the true believers. I'll have more to say on this subject on another occasion. Just to conclude here, we fast forward to the time in Revelation 17. And just quickly, I'm just going to mention here, in that chapter, it talks about John sees this scarlet-coloured beast ascending out of the abyss, out of the bottomless pit. It also had 7 heads and 10 horns. And it's telling us that the Roman Empire, the scarlet-coloured beast, the Roman Empire was going to manifest itself yet one more time. It's scarlet-coloured because it was stained with the blood of the saints. And he also sees a woman who rides this beast. The Catholic Church is going to rise in influence and direct the affairs of the Roman Empire as she rides, as she directs the beast here. It describes a time when the 10 horns will give its power to the beast and make war with Christ and the saints. And actually, that Roman Empire is ascending before our very eyes. The beast is coming up out of the bottomless pit. And that's highlighted by this Time magazine article, which talks about the new Roman Empire and a picture of Pope Francis on there. It's happening now, brothers and sisters. It is coming up out of the abyss. And so the papacy will deceive the world once again. It will convince the nations of Europe to rebel against the reign of Christ and the saints. And remember, we read there that it was given authority to continue for 42 months. Well, that means it's definitely going to have an end. But this time, the beast and its rider will be finally destroyed for good. This time, Christ will have the victory and take vengeance on that dreadful system. When will the Catholic system and its papal head be destroyed? Well, if we take 1260 years from the date that the Pope crowned the emperor of the new Roman Empire, we get the year 2060. And it would seem fairly conclusive that this year 2060 would signal the end of the papacy, the end of the little horn, the end of the fourth beast. Does this indicate when Christ will come? Well, it does, and it doesn't. Because Christ will come well before that date. So many events like the resurrection, the judgment seat, the battle of Armageddon, the call to submit to Christ's rule, the 1 hour or 30-year period which the horns give power to the beast, they've all got to happen before the papacy is destroyed. The Lord is coming, brothers and sisters, and may it be very soon. Thanks, Glenn.